Welcome back from the ad break. Let's continue with our lesson. So now we are going to be looking at changing mixed fractions to improper fractions. Remember, I showed you how to do that. Let's just look at some examples. The first thing that we're going to do is to separate the whole number with the common fractions. Then we need to get them to the same denominator. So 4 as a whole number is actually the same as 12 thirds. Because if you say 12 divided by 3, that gives us a 4 as a whole number. We're still adding the 2 thirds. And then when I add those two, that is going to be, so now we have 12 thirds plus 2 thirds. And that is just going to give us a total of 14 thirds. And I've changed my number there into an improper fraction. The same with the following one. We have 7 and 2 fifths. So I'm just going to separate those two. And then 7 can also be written as 35 divided by 5. Because remember, I want to keep the same denominator as our common fraction. So we have now 35 fifths and we are adding 2 more fifths. That will give us a total of 37 fifths. We have 15 wholes and 1 half. That means 15 plus 1 half. But if I want to write 15 with a denominator of 2, that is just 30 halves. And we are going to add that to 1 half. That will give me 31 halves in total. Let's look at the next point on our concept map, and that is calculation with common fractions. Calculations with common fractions. So when we are adding common fractions, so when we are adding and subtracting common fractions, we keep the denominator and add or subtract the numerators. An example of this is if I have 1 third plus 1 third. We are adding thirds. So what's going to happen if I add 1 third with 1 third? Yes, you are correct. This means that we are going to now have 2 thirds in the picture. So that is going to be the 1 plus the 1. That's where we are going to now add or subtract the numerators. So 1 plus 1, and then all of this is divided by 3, giving us an answer of 2 thirds. Because 1 third plus 1 third gives us 2 thirds. So just remember, 1 third plus 1 third. If you read it out loud, it will make more sense to you because I'm just adding a third and a third. Just keep the denominator and add the numerators. What about when we are subtracting? So now, again, I have 4 fifths minus 3 fifths. Read it out loud. Let it make sense to you. I have 4 fifths and I am subtracting 3 fifths. How many fifths will I have left? I'm going to subtract the numerators and I am going to just keep the denominator. That gives me a total of 1 fifth. So what if they have different denominators? So that one you need to look out for. The other ones were easy because we were dealing with fifths and fifths or thirds and thirds. So what about when they have different denominators? For us to keep the denominator must be the same. So when the denominators are not the same, we must find the LCM, that is the lowest common multiple, to make sure that the denominators are the same. Here's an example. I have 2 fifths plus 1 half. So can you see that I'm working with fifths and halves? So how can I make this calculation easier? The first thing that you need to do is to find the LCM between 5 and 2. What is the LCM of 5 and 2? That is 10. So we need to change the current denominators so that they are the same. How are we going to change those denominators? The denominator 5 needs to change to the LCM, which is 10. And we also need to change the 2, which is also 10. So how are we going to do that? We are going to multiply that denominator with 2. Why am I multiplying the 5 with the 2? Because 5 multiplied by 2 is going to give me that LCM of 10. So with the fraction of 5 over 2, or 2 divided by 5, or 2/5, we are going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 2. And that is going to take us to 4/10. Remember equivalent fractions? They might look different, but when you simplify them, they become the same. So remember earlier on we did simplify 4/10 and we did get 2/5. So what is going to happen here? We are starting with the original 2/5 plus 1/2. How is that going to work out? We are going to multiply the denominator and the numerator by 2. And the reason why we are doing this is because we don't want to change that value. When the answer comes out as 4/10, it is still the same as 2/5. We are going to do the same thing with the second fraction. We had 1/2 in the beginning, but because the LCM is 10, we need to multiply the denominator by 5 because that's going to give us the 10. And then we also need to multiply the numerator by 5 because we are keeping the value of that common fraction. So now, what do we have? We have 5/10. So 4/10 plus 5/10. Now, because we have the same denominator, it makes our calculation much easier. When I add 4/10 with 5/10, I get a total of 9/10. The same thing happens when we are working with subtraction. So for example, I have the same number still. We have 2/5 minus 1/2. Again, we're working with fifths and halves. But after we convert them to our LCM, of which we've already seen that it is 10, now I have 4/10 minus 5/10. And we can already minus a bigger number from a smaller number. We know our answer is going to be negative. So that is our 4 minus our 5, but we're still working with the tenths, and that is going to give us a negative 1/10. So let's add the following and see if we can do what we have practiced now. So we have 1/2 plus 3/8. So the first thing that we're going to do is to find the lowest common multiple. And the lowest common multiple between 2 and 8 is 8. So this means that we are going to take the 2, multiply it by 4, because 2 multiplied by 4 is 8. And we are going to also multiply the numerator by 4, just to make sure that we keep that value. We are adding this to 3 divided by 8. Why am I not changing the denominator? Why am I not multiplying by anything? It's because that denominator is already our lowest common multiple, and that is now going to give us 1 multiplied by 4 is 4, and 2 multiplied by 4 is 8. So now my expression reads 4/8 plus 3/8. And that becomes much easier because we are just going to add the 4 and the 3. We are still working with 8s, and that is going to give me a final answer of 7/8. Let's look at the next one for subtraction. So for subtraction here, we are going to say we have 5/6 minus 3/4. What are we supposed to do? We are supposed to find the lowest common multiple. And the lowest common multiple here is 12. So how am I going to get both common fractions to that 12? How do I move from 6 to 12? I'm going to multiply by 2. And I'm going to do the same thing for the numerator. Then we need to take our 4 to that 12, and that is me multiplying by 3. And when I multiply the numerator also by 3, what do I have? I now have 10 divided by 12, and we are subtracting 9 divided by 12. twelfth. What is that? That is 10 twelfths minus 9 twelfths. That will give us a total of 1 twelfth. So that was when we have different denominators. What about when we have a whole number and a common fraction? Let's see how we can calculate that. So when we are calculating with common fractions, it's easier to calculate when every number is a fraction. So when we come across a whole number, we must first change the whole number into a fraction. We do this by dividing by 1. Do you remember those properties of 1? If a number is divided by 1, it does not change the value of the number. In fact, the number remains the same. But we will divide it by 1 so that every number can be a fraction. So for example, 4 will become 4 divided by 1. The value of the whole number does not change. So here's an example where I have 4 plus 2/9. How will I solve this? Remember the first point there? It is easier to calculate when every number is a fraction. So the only thing I'm going to do there is to just change the 4 to a fraction. And after I've changed the 4 to a fraction, now I have 2 fractions. And what am I going to do? I'm going to make sure that I change the denominators to be the same. I'm going to first start by finding the lowest common multiple, and then I can solve for those 2. Let's look at the last point of our lesson, and that is solving problems. When we are solving problems with common fractions, we need to look for the key words that indicate whether we will be adding, subtracting, dividing, or multiplying. In this lesson, we are focusing on adding and subtraction. So our key words are going to be ones that indicate to us whether we should add or subtract. For example here, Paolo and Sergio buy a pizza. Sergio eats 2/5 of the pizza. How much of the pizza is left over? Now think about it. When the pizza was still whole, how much of the pizza did we have? We had only 1 pizza. But now Sergio has eaten part of the pizza. We need to represent that into an equation. So 1 whole pizza minus the eaten pizza. And why are we minusing? It's because he has eaten them. That indicates that those pieces are no longer there. So we have here 1 minus 2/5 of the pizza. But again, we are working with a whole number and a common fraction. So what do? It is easier to change all numbers into fractions. And we are going to do this by saying 1 divided by 1. 1 divided by 1 still remains 1. But we have now all the numbers into our fractions. And how would we solve for that? We would need to find the LCM between 1 and 5. And the LCM between 1 and 5 is 5. This means that we are going to multiply that 1 by 5, and we are going to do the same thing for the numerator as well. What do we have as our fraction now that it has been changed? This will be 5 divided by 5. And what is 5 divided by 5? It still is 1, which is what we originally had. So the value does not change. And now I have 5/5 minus 2/5. What does that leave me with? If you are thinking of 3/5, then you are absolutely correct. That means that Sergio didn't finish the pizza. Paula still has some pizza to eat. That was it for today's lesson. I really hope you did enjoy it. Thank you for joining us, and then we'll see you next time. Goodbye.